Hi everyone. So today I decided to shoot this video in English, and the reason for that is because I'm going to talk about books that I've read recently, and all these books are in English. So I read all of these books in English, regardless of they are originally in English, written in English or not, but I read them in English. So I was thinking that this is a good opportunity to share with you guys about these books and why I like them and why I recommend them, and also to just show you how useful it is to read in English to improve your vocabulary. I mentioned it before that a lot of my vocabulary, a huge proportion of my vocabulary came from books I've read, and I find that incredibly efficient to read books in English and to improve your vocabulary and in general your speaking and reading ability. And also this book, this video is going to be mostly for those who are a little bit more advanced, because all these books are full in English, and also I'm speaking in English because why not, right? Like, at least we have a little bit of chance to practice. So these are the books I've read recently, meaning I think approximately in the past 1 year, maybe year or so, 8-9 months. And also these books are books that I've read and also I've listened to in an audiobook format. I also mentioned it before that I use Audible, the Audible app, which I'm not affiliated with in any way. I wish I were, but I'm not. So Audible is an app, an application that you can download, and you can purchase with credits audiobooks. So these are books read, narrated by various people, actors and all sorts of people. And this is an amazing opportunity because when you listen to a book, number one, it's very good for your listening skill, and also because you can do something else. So I always cook, do some housework, and I can listen to a book while I'm doing it. So whenever I cook, whenever I clean, whenever I do some kind of housework, or even if I paint or draw or something like that, I always listen to a book. And so these books are going to be a mix of books I've read on paper or on my Kindle, or I listen to. And I think some books are kind of better to listen to, and some books are better to read. I'm one of those people who loves a paper book. I love paperback and hardcover books, but I also like my Kindle a lot. I also read on my phone, which is not very, very good for your eyes, but I do that too because it's just so portable and it's so easy. So especially now that a lot of you guys have more time to read, or maybe just kind of interested in reading more, and also in English, I think this is the best time to do that. And the great thing about an e-reader is that you just download books, so you don't have to order books, you don't have to go out for them, you don't have to do anything but download the book. So this is a list of the books that I like and I enjoyed, and I'm just going to share them with you. You will see that the genre of these books is mixed. So I like to read fiction, and I'm going to explain why. So I mentioned it before in one of my previous videos that I love to read, and I always have. So I read a lot of classical fiction when I was younger and when I was a kid. So these days it's a mix of things that I read, and there is a reason why I think that actually reading popular fiction in English is super useful. It's many ways better than reading classical fiction for you, because it helps you improve your speaking ability, because what you are reading is closer to the real spoken English. So before I start, I also have to add that I don't really read popular self-improvement books and such. I prefer to read psychology, even sociology, but I I actually studied a lot of psychology, and I find that more entertaining, way closer to me. I don't really like other people telling me how I should be thinking. I like to think for myself. So that's the reason why I actually prefer to read psychology, sociology, fiction, and all sorts of things, but not really these popular how to be a badass type of books. It's just not really my kind of thing. So the first book I would like to mention is a book called A Long Way Home, and it's by Saroo Brierley. You may have seen the film. I do believe that it was also dubbed in Hungarian, and it was called The Lion. The film is called The Lion, and the book is called A Long Way Home. And this is a story of an Indian boy in the 1980s who is from a small village in India, and he gets lost in Kolkata, and then he is eventually adopted by parents, by people in New Zealand. And then 20-something years later, with the help of Google Earth, he finds his origins. So he eventually finds his own mother, his real biological mother. This is a true story. The book is a true story, and Saroo Brierley is actually the guy in the book. So this is a biographical book. Absolutely fantastic. It's one of the best books I've ever read, actually, both because it's super entertaining and it's a true story, and it is just really, really beautiful and inspiring in so many ways. So I absolutely recommend this book. It's called A Long Way Home by Saroo Brierley. The second book I'm going to mention is a book I've read, but I didn't actually like. It's an Italian book. I read it in English. My Italian is, I don't think it's good enough to read this book. It's by Elena Ferrante, and it's called My Brilliant Friend. This is a series. I think this is the first book of the series. I didn't read the rest because I didn't really like this book. I didn't dislike it. I thought it was interesting. It's set in southern Italy, and it's a story of two women growing up together. For some reason, I know it's a very popular book. If you look it up in Hungarian too, you're going to find this. But for some reason, I didn't really like the style. I found it a bit unrealistic and slightly irritating. Not sure why. All right, so the third book I read is called The Help. And this is also a book that where generally the topic, the background is something that I'm super interested in. So it's by Kathryn Stockett, and again, the title of the book is The Help. And this is about Black people in the 60s who are, it's called The Help because they worked as paid help in America at white families. And I'm very, very interested in the history of Black people in the 20th century in America. And this is also, it's a fictional book, but I found it very, very entertaining, really intriguing, and very well written. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, I highly recommend it. I was listening to this book, so this helped a lot because, as in the enjoyment of the book, because the accent that it's read with, it's in the southern accent that those people who are in the book probably would speak with. So it made it just even more enjoyable and fun. All right, the next book I want to mention is a completely different book. It's actually a book that I read a while ago, but I just opened it again because I think it's just really relevant to what's going on today. And this is one of those classic books that I think tells you much more about thinking and psychology than any of these modern like self-help books. And so this is a book by Viktor Frankl, and in English it's called Man's Search for Meaning. And originally it was written in German. Again, I read it in English because all these books I read in English. So Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl was a doctor who lived through the Holocaust, and he survived. And this book is about his kind of his experience in the death camp in Auschwitz, but not really about the physicality, not so much about the physicality, but the mental experience and how he lived through it and how he was observing other people living through this. So, which was an incredibly gruesome and difficult time. And he was also analyzing how those people were feeling and thinking. So if you are, this is obviously this book is darker, it's heavier, but if you feel like you have the capacity and the strength to read it, either in English or even in Hungarian, this is an absolutely incredible book. All right, so the next book is going to be a more lighthearted book. This was called Park Avenue Summer. So last summer I had the opportunity and the pleasure to visit New York City with my mom, which feels like a lifetime ago with what's going on today. And it's also painful to think about, but at that time I always get very interested in certain things and I start reading about them. So this was one of those things that when we came back from New York, I started reading, I started looking for fictional books that are set in New York. And this was one of those. So it's called Park Avenue Summer by Renee Rosen. And this is a book, if I remember correctly, it was set in the late 50s, early 60s. It was a while ago, so I'm not quite sure, but I think it's a late 50s, early 60s. And Park Avenue, obviously Park Avenue is in New York, and this is called Park Avenue Summer. It's about a girl who moves to New York City in that time and starts working in New York City and her experiences. So you see New York through her eyes, how she experiences the big city and how women experienced the Big Apple, the big city at that time, and what kind of opportunities, what kind of experiences, what kind of difficulties and hurdles they had. So this is a more lighthearted book. You can call it a chick lit, but at the same time I found it super interesting. That's one of my favorite eras, by the way. So the 50s, 60s America is something that I'm very interested in. So this was a really good, lighter, but very well written book that I read. The next book is also set in New York. It's called City of Girls, right? The city is New York. And it's written by someone that a lot of you will recognize. It's written by Elizabeth Gilbert, who also wrote Eat, Pray, Love and Committed, if you know those books. So City of Girls is again describing New York through women's eyes from the early 20th century through the kind of late 20th century. So these girls are living in New York, experiencing New York, but like from 100 years ago. So it's a very different perspective, what women did and could do and how in that time in America, in New York. Again, more lighthearted book. I think it's also well written. It's probably not the best book that Elizabeth Gilbert has ever written, but it's good. I also listened to this book on Audible. So there is a Netflix show called Mindhunter. And I like these kind of real crime shows. We call them real crime shows. And I decided to listen to the book. The book is similar to the show, the series. It's also called Mindhunter, and it's co-written by John E. Douglas and others. And Mindhunter is also exploring the minds and the workings of the minds of these serial killers. So killers who, from the 60s, 70s, who were killing people in various states of America. And this book is also interesting because it's describing how the FBI was, how the FBI started to focus on behavioral science. So behavioral science is when you watch people's behavior and what they do and how and why. And behavioral science in crime was a key element to finding these serial killers, because they started researching and they started analyzing criminals' behaviors. And based on the database and the facts that they found, they had an easier time, or they had new tools to find those serial killers they were looking for. So based on what they did, how they did it, how they dressed, what cars they drove, what clues they left, their motivation, they had a very good opportunity at tracking these criminals and finding them. While previously they were just looking at the evidence, the hard evidence, like the blood and the this and the that. And because of this behavioral science unit that the FBI founded at that time in the 70s, they became way more efficient at finding these criminals. All right. A more popular fiction book that a lot of you must have read is actually not one book, but two books I read by Stephen King. Now, before the film It came out, I had never read Stephen King books, not sure why. So It was the first Stephen King book I had ever read, and I found it very good. Like, it's a long book. I didn't read it, I listened to it, and it was 45 hours, I believe, 45 hours of listening. But the good thing again is that you can come and go about your business while you're listening to a book. It was one of those books that I really enjoyed, but I also loved how the characters and their inner lives and their background and their childhood was described. So I think the best part of the book for me was their childhood. And if you read the book, that you know that the film was set in the 80s, the first part of the film, and the book is set in the 50s, which for me is way more interesting. So I loved the book. Even if you saw the film, if you have the time and the will, read this book, read it. Because I think it's really worth it. And the second book I read by Stephen King was The Shining. The Shining was also made into a film, and again I discovered Stephen King that I really like this book, so I got the second most popular book, The Shining. I thought The Shining was also great, not as great for me as It, but still this is a classic book. And I think it's really worth reading. So Shining was also exciting in a different way. I also kind of had a phase when I was reading these slightly fictional crime kind of books, absolutely popular fiction. So don't expect anything deep. But sometimes I need this kind of stuff, and sometimes I read this kind of stuff. So I read a couple of books by Harlan Coben, Tell No One and Run Away. These are all kind of similar, like I said, easy read, popular crime books. And I read Summer of Night by Dan Simmons, which was a bit better written. It's a pretty well-written book. So Summer of Night by Dan Simmons. It's slightly like sci-fi, like for me, at least, crime. Very exciting, definitely exciting. All right, yes, there is one book that I want to mention. I read this book about a year and a half ago, so a bit longer ago. But if you like biographies, then this is probably the best biography I've read. And it's called The Shoe Dog, without the, so it's called Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. And Phil Knight is the creator of Nike. And it's his biography. Intriguing. So I couldn't put it down. This was one of those books. Everyone knows Nike. Everyone is interested what's behind Nike. And you get that story here. Super well written, super easy to read. Highly, highly recommend it. So Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. And the last book I want to mention today is a book I'm currently reading. And this book is special because the writer, the author, is special to me. Her name is Marion Keys, and Marion Keys is the author whose books I read from the beginning. I've read all of her books. She is an Irish writer, and she's considered a chick lit writer, so like popular fiction for women. I think her writing style deserves more than that. Fabulous writing style. I find her books absolutely terrific. And this last book is called Grown Ups. And if you like her, she has an amazing sense of humor. So her books are super funny. This book I'm listening to, so it's narrated by herself, so it's Marion Keys. And she speaks with an Irish accent, which if you're not used to it, you have to get used to it. but it makes it a lot of fun. And her books are always about relationships, families, friendships, love, all sorts of relationships. She has this fantastic imagination. I have no idea how she comes up with the stories, but all her books are amazing. Like, if you are interested, look up Marion Keys. I love Watermelon. I love Lush and Salon. I love all of her books. I have my favorites, but I do love all of her books. So these are the fictional books that I've read recently, and I wanted to share with you guys. Now, I just want to say a few words about why I think reading in English is very helpful. So if you are at intermediate or advanced level, then reading books helps you improve your vocabulary and speaking ability very quickly. At first, reading in English is going to be difficult because you have to get used to it. Reading in English requires a certain skill, and I would like to do a video for you guys about how to start learning reading in English. So there is a way that you can teach yourself to learn in English and get to a level where you can read basically anything you want. I know it's a little bit different and might be a little surprising that I did this video today in English. And then a lot of you are used to me speaking in Hungarian about English, but this is a topic that I definitely wanted to talk about in English. And so I'm very curious what you guys read in English, and if you have read any of those books that I talked about today or not, or you're interested in them. Very interested in what you think and what you read in English. So share that, definitely share that with us. Take care of yourselves. Stay at home. Read books. See you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.